Eucharist is something close to our heart. Yes, Eucharist is the sacrifice of body and blood of Lord Jesus, which He instituted to perpetuate the sacrifice of His cross throughout His ages until He returns in glory. The Kalyan Media said, presents before you the Eucharist, a miracle of the real presence. A documentary which helps us to strengthen our knowledge on Eucharist and 20 Eucharistic miracles that took place around the world. So, here comes our own dear director, Father Franklin Joseph, with explanation.
What is Eucharist? One of the most used words in Catholicism is the word Eucharist. It is heard every Sunday at Mass or on all the occasion of Masses, and we the Catholics use it all the time. But what does it mean? The Catechism of the Catholic Church offers a brief definition of the word. It states, Eucharist is an action of thanksgiving to God. The Greek words Eucharistine and Eulogine recall the Jewish blessings that proclaim, especially during a meal, God's works, creation, redemption, and sanctification. Essentially, the word Eucharist means giving thanks. We also refer to it as the Lord's Supper because it flows from that famous Last Supper which Jesus shared with His friends. We call it the breaking of the bread because in that Last Supper, Jesus used the rite of breaking and sharing the bread. We refer to the Eucharist as the memorial of the Lord's Passion and Resurrection, the holy sacrifice and sacrifice of praise. In Vatican II document Lumen Gentium, it is said that the Eucharist is the source and summit of the Christian life. It is a source of our union together as the people of God. In the Eucharist, the sacrifice of the Christ becomes also the sacrifice of the members of His body. The lives of the faithful, that means our praise, our sufferings, our prayers, our works are united to those of Christ. Inasmuch as it is a sacrifice, the Eucharist is likewise offered for all the faithful, living and dead, in reparation for the sins of all and to obtain spiritual and temporal benefits from God. The Church in heaven is also united to the offering of Christ. Christ gives us His own body and blood in the Holy Eucharist. First, to be offered as a sacrifice, commemorating and renewing for all the time the sacrifice of the cross. Second, to be received by the faithful in Holy Communion. Third, to remain ever on our altars as the proof of His love for us and to be worshipped by us.
Miracles teach us to have faith. Miracles also demonstrate the close relationship Jesus had with God, His Father. Miracles also prove that Jesus' teachings are true. Yes, now we are moving from what is Eucharist to Eucharist as a miracle. Here, Father Shizuoke teaches us Eucharist as a miracle.
Eucharist as miracle. Throughout Christian history, our Lord has showed us that He is really present as the Blessed Sacrament. Interestingly, many Eucharistic miracles have occurred during times of weakened faith as a result of someone doubting the real presence. Most Eucharistic miracles involve incidences in which the Holy Communion has turned into the human flesh and blood. Of course, we as Catholics believe that the consecrated host is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord under the appearances of bread and wine. Therefore, Jesus, through these miracles, merely manifests His presence in a more tangible way. In the Gospel of John, we see he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not be faithless but believing." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." Technically, a Eucharistic miracle is any miracle involving the Eucharist. Although the Eucharist is undoubtedly a miracle, it is often referred to as a mystery in the Catechism text. Catechism of the Catholic Church number 1374 says, "The mode of Christ's presence under the Eucharistic species is unique. It raises the Eucharist above all the sacraments as a perfection of spiritual life and the end to which all the sacraments tend. In the most blessed sacrament of the Eucharist, the body and blood, together with the soul and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ, and therefore the whole Christ, is truly, really, and substantially contained. This presence is called real, by which is not intended to exclude the other types of presence as if they could not be real too, but because it is presence in the fullest sense. That is to say, it is a substantial presence by which Christ, God and man makes himself wholly and entirely present. Catechism of the Catholic Church says the Eucharist is the source and summit of our Christian life. The other sacraments, and indeed all ecclesiastical ministries and works of the apostolate, are bound up with the Eucharist and are oriented towards it. For in the Blessed Eucharist is contained the whole spiritual good of the Church, namely Christ Himself, our Paschal Lamb. Eucharistic miracles enlightens and reminds us of the tremendous power alive in the Blessed Sacrament. When we are fully aware of the real presence of Jesus in the Holy Eucharist, we can find comfort, strength, and responsibility. St. Francis de Sales said it perfectly when he wrote, "When you have received Him, stir up your heart, do to Him homage, speak to Him about your spiritual life, gazing upon Him in your soul where He is present for your happiness, welcome Him as warmly as possible, and behave outwardly in such a way that your actions may give proof to all of His presence."
Through the Eucharistic miracle, God communicates His love and care. In the world, Eucharistic miracles took place in different types and forms, which will be explained by our KMC volunteers from Andheri 14.
Types and forms of Eucharistic miracles. What are miracles? Miracle is an event not explicable by nature or scientific laws. Theologians typically say that with the divine providence, God regularly works through nature, yet as a creator, is free to work without, above, or against it as well.
There are two types of miracles, instantaneous miracle and perseverance miracle. Instantaneous miracle. This is the first kind of miracle where God supernaturally removes or resolves a problem, like when someone is physically ill and God removes their sickness. I call these instantaneous miracles because they happen in a moment's notice. The Apostle Paul did many instantaneous miracles. God performed extraordinary miracles through Paul. Act 19:11.
Perseverance miracle. The second kind of miracle is the kind where God chooses not to supernaturally remove or resolve a problem. Instead, God gives His ongoing miraculous strength to us to enable us to pursue through our problems. This kind of miracle happened routinely in the Bible, and it still happens as frequently today. I call these perseverance miracle because the miracle does not occur. James chapter 1 verse 3 tells us that testing of our faith develops perseverance.
One such type of miracle is tangible substantiation miracle. The rarest type of reported Eucharistic miracle is where the Eucharist turns into human flesh. A Eucharistic miracle that is most commonly reported by the Catholics is that of bleeding communion, where the blood starts to trickle from the consecrated communion, a bread consecrated during the Holy Mass. Other type of reported Eucharistic miracle include a consecrated communion being preserved for hundreds of years as the event of miraculous communion of Siena. Other miracles also include a consecrated communion passing through the fire, a stolen communion vanishing and appearing in the church, and levitating consecrated communion.
Forms of the miracles: blood-stained clothes, a bright light, the face of the Christ child, parting of the waters, the miracle of Mass.
Eucharistic miracle reveals the power and love of Jesus Christ. So, here are some of the 20 Eucharistic miracles that took place around the world.
This is the first and the greatest Eucharistic miracle of the Catholic Church. This miracle occurred while a monk from the monks of St. Basil was celebrating Holy Mass. Although we do not know his identity, an ancient document describes him as someone having doubts about the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. While he was celebrating the Holy Mass, while saying the words of consecration, "This is my body, this is my blood," the bread and wine transformed into real human flesh and blood. The blood coagulated into 5 globules. Word of the miracle quickly spread. The local archbishop launched an investigation and the church approved the miracle. The flesh is still preserved to this day. Professors of anatomy conducted a scientific analysis of the flesh in 1971 and concluded that the flesh was cardiac tissue and the blood appeared to be fresh blood as opposed to blood that was 1200 years old with no trace of preservatives. The blood type was AB, the same as was found on the Shroud of Turin.
On March 28, 1171, Father Peter of Verona, prior of the Basilica, was celebrating the Easter Mass. And when the time came for the breaking of the Holy Communion, he saw a stream of blood spray from the consecrated communion. The blood gushed forth from the Holy Communion and threw large drops on the ceiling of the small crypt above the altar. Bishop Amata of Ferrara as well as Archbishop of Gerardo were immediately informed. In 1595, to better preserve it, the little vault was enclosed in a small shrine, which still can be seen at the Basilica of Santa Maria in Vado at Ferrara.
This Eucharistic miracle occurred in Italy in St. Andrew's Church, Trani, around the year 1000. A non-Christian woman who didn't believe in the truth of Catholic belief of the presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. One day, along with a friend, she succeeded in stealing a consecrated communion, and to challenge God, she put it on a greased fry pan over the fire. As soon as the boiling oil came in contact with the communion, it miraculously became flesh with dripping blood. So much so that the blood spilled out of the pan, flowed through the doorway by the entrance. The Archbishop was immediately informed, who then ordered the miraculous communion to be brought back to the church. At present, the miraculous communion is in the chapel in St. Andrew's Church, Trani, Italy.
30th December 1230. In 1230, Father Uguccione, as he finished Mass, by mistake left some drops of the consecrated blood in the chalice. The following day, when he returned to celebrate Mass in the same church, he found in the chalice some drops of living blood, which had solidified and turned into flesh color. The blood was immediately placed into a container made of crystal. In 1399, Pope Boniface IX granted indulgence to the faithful who visited the church of St. Ambrose and contributed to the adornment of the reliquary of the miracle.
A Bohemian priest named Father Peter of Prague came to Italy. On his return trip to Bohemia, he stopped at Bolsena, where he decided to celebrate Mass in the church named in honor of Saint Christina. The priest began to celebrate Mass and had just finished pronouncing the words of consecration, where he saw that the Holy Communion, which he held in his hands, has been transformed into living flesh sprinkled with red blood, which spilled onto the altar, staining the altar cloth and the corporal. After a thorough examination, Pope Urban IV approved the miracle. He then decided to extend the feast of Corpus Christi, which up to that time had only been a local feast of the Diocese of Lecce, to the entire Church Universal.
The Eucharistic miracle of Orvieto at Lanciano, Italy, in 1273. A woman named Ricciarella, in order to regain the affection of her husband Giacomo, at the suggestion of a temptress, stole a Holy Communion. Returning to her house, she put the Holy Communion over the fire above an earthenware jar, with the intention of reducing it to a powder and then putting it in her husband's food. The Holy Communion, however, was transformed into bleeding flesh. Ricciarella was terrified and wrapped up the jar and the bleeding communion in a linen cloth and then buried it in a hole under a pile of manure in her husband's Giacomo's stable. Giacomo's donkey, every time it entered the stable, knelt down towards the place where the miraculous Eucharist was buried. Knowing the reality, Father Giacomo's, prior of the Augustine monastery, found the wrapped up bundle intact together with the relics and placed at the Church of St. Augustine, Orvieto.
In 1294, a young housemaid went to the public washhouse of Osceola to wash the altar lines on the Church of St. Giusto in Guruvara. Suddenly she noticed that the consecrated communion was by mistake left behind in the folds of the cloth and that blood was flowing through the communion. She immediately ran to alert the priest of Guruvara, who then informed the Bishop of Concordia. The bishop, having learned the facts, wanted to keep the cloth in his cathedral. The priest of Guruvara too wanted to keep the relic. Finally, Rome decided that they get to keep the relic under the condition that they build a church dedicated to the most holy blood of Christ. Though the miracle happened in Guruvara, the relic is kept in the most sacred blood of Christ church in Margostomi, in a crystal cylinder held by a precious silver reliquary.
A woman living in Santarém, Portugal, in the 13th century was distressed that her husband was unfaithful to her. So she decided to consult a temptress for help. The temptress told her the price for her services would be a consecrated communion. This woman goes to attend a mass at the church of St. Stephen and receives the Holy Eucharist on her tongue, removes the Eucharist from her mouth, wrapped it in her veil and headed to the door of the church. But before she could step out of the church, the communion began to bleed. When she reached home, she took the bloodied communion and put it in a trunk. That night, a miraculous light emanated from that trunk. She then repented of what she had done, and the next day morning, she confessed to the priest. The priest then came home and retrieved the communion and took it back to the church. After an investigation and approval of the miracle, the church was renamed as the Church of the Holy Miracle, and the bloodied communion remains on display to this day.
In 1330, at Cascia, a gravely ill patient called the priest so he could receive Holy Communion. The priest, instead of taking the Holy Communion in a ciborium, irreverently placed the Eucharist in his prayer book and went to the house of the sick man. When he reached the peasant, the priest opened the book and with astonishment saw that the Holy Communion was transformed into a clot of blood and the pages of the book were marked with blood. In 1930, on the occasion of the 6th centenary of the event, a Eucharistic Congress was celebrated at Cascia for the entire Diocese of Nocha. A precious and artistic monstrance was consecrated and the entire historical documentation of the miracle was published.
The miracle in Amsterdam, Holland. On 12th March 1345, as a man lay in bed, sick and dying, a priest came to administer the last rites. After confession, the sick man received Holy Communion, but soon afterward he vomited. The woman, caring for him, swept it up, including the vomited communion, and threw it into the fire. The next morning, however, after stirring the coals to rekindle the fire, she noticed the Eucharist floating above the flames. She placed the Blessed Sacrament in a clean linen cloth and put it into a trunk. She sent for a priest who silently brought the communion to St. Nicholas Church. To everyone's surprise, however, the next morning the communion was found again in the trunk. The priest came for a second time, taking the communion back to St. Nicholas's. Yet, the following day, the communion was again in the trunk. These unusual events made the priest realize that God did not want the miracle of the communion to be kept a secret. 1 year later, the Bishop of Utrecht, after having completed an official investigation, proclaimed the miracle's credibility.
In 1472, during the war that broke out between Volterra and Florence, a Florentine soldier who had entered the Cathedral of Volterra managed to take possession of the precious ivory ciborium containing numerous consecrated hosts. After he had just left the church, seized with a fit of anger towards the Eucharistic Jesus, he threw the ciborium together with all of its precious contents against a wall of the church. All the communion fell out of the ciborium and, illuminated by a mysterious light, miraculously rose up in mid-air and remained suspended for an extended period. The soldier fell onto his knees out of fear, and as he repented over his deed, he wept.
The first miracle of Asti occurred on July 25, 1535. During the Holy Mass at the main altar of the Church of San Secondo, when Father Domenico was about to break the communion, he saw it turn red with the living blood along the entire length of the crack. When he detached the part of the communion to be placed in the baton, he saw blood come out of this as well. When the priest took the communion to consume it, the blood had disappeared, and the host had suddenly regained its whiteness. On November 6, 1535, in which Pope Paul III granted a plenary indulgence to all who visit the church of San Secondo and recite 3 Our Fathers and 3 Hail Marys for the intention of the Holy Father.
The Eucharistic miracle of Veroli at the Church of St. Erasmus, Veroli, Italy. On Easter of 1570, at the Church of St. Erasmus, the consecrated communion was enclosed in a silver case of cylindrical shape, which was then placed inside a large chalice used for Mass, also made of silver, and then covered with the paten. All of this was then wrapped in an elegant silk cloth. It should be pointed out that the exposition of the Blessed Sacrament in the monstrance. One person among the group who witnessed this gave a detailed description. And so, as I raised my eyes towards the chalice, I saw from the cup of the chalice a brilliant star, and above the star the Blessed Sacrament appeared. The miracle reached its high point when, around the consecrated communion, there appeared some infants, bowed in adoration like little angels. The miracle is still commemorated today with a solemn ceremony in which the bishop also participates each year on Tuesday within the octave of Easter.
During the 17th century, a grieving young girl approached priest Don Milan at the church of Our Lady of Montserrat. She begged the abbot to say 3 masses for her deceased father. The young girl was totally convinced that these masses would speed her father on his way to heaven, releasing him from the pain of purgatory. During the first mass, the young girl was kneeling, and as she looked up, she knew that her father was near the altar. The priest was altered to this miraculous phenomenon, and he instructed the girl to place a piece of tissue where her father was kneeling. The tissue immediately started on fire, for all to see, though the priest could not see the child's father. A second mass was said for the response of her father's soul, and again the little girl saw her father. This time he was up a step standing next to the deacon and was dressed in a vibrantly colored suit. At the third mass, she saw her father for the last time. During the Eucharistic celebration, he was dressed in a snow-white suit. But then, something extraordinary happened at the conclusion of Mass. The little girl exclaimed, "There is my father," going and rising into the sky. She no longer had to worry about the father, and she knew with confidence that he reached the gate of heaven.
The host of Saint Italy in the 18th century. This event took place in the church of St. Francis on 14th of August 1730. On 14th of August 1730, while the Catholics of Siena, Italy, were celebrating the Feast of Assumption, thieves entered the church of St. Francis and stole a golden ciborium containing of hundreds of consecrated communion. 2 days later, someone noticed something white coming through the offering box at another church in Siena. The priest opened the box and found the missing host inside, entangled in dirt. After being cleaned as much as possible, the communion was placed in a new ciborium and taken back to the Church of St. Francis for prayers of reparation and veneration. Since the communion were dirty, the priest decided not to consume them, but let them simply decay. Over the next few years, everyone was amazed to see that the communion did not actually decay but was appeared fresh.
This miracle occurred at the Marian Shrine of Finca Britannia in Cuba, Venezuela on 8th December 1991. Father Orvieto was celebrating Mass in the chapel of the Shrine of Britannia in Cuba. After having consumed one of the pieces of the large Eucharist that he had divided into 4 parts, he returned them to the paten. A little later, he looked down towards the paten and he could not believe what he saw. One of the pieces of the communion that he had divided was showing a red spot, and from it a red substance began to flow, almost similar to the manner in which blood escapes from a wound. After Mass, he took the Holy Eucharist and preserved it safely in the sacristy of the shrine. The next day, he went to see the Holy Eucharist and verified that some blood continued to flow and a little later began to dry. However, still today the blood appears as fresh. The Eucharist of the miracle was subject to some special studies, and the results confirmed that the blood was human blood of type AB positive, which matches the one to the Holy Communion of the Eucharistic miracle of Lanciano that occurred in Italy in 750 AD.
On 8th August 1996, while a parishioner was receiving the Holy Communion, communion slipped off his hand and fell on the ground. He decided not to pick it up as it seemed soiled to him, but he did inform the parish priest, Father Alejandro, about it. The priest then picked up the communion and placed it in a container filled with water.
Tabernacle.
On 26th August 1996,
Tabernacle
was reopened to remove the Holy Communion, but the priest found out that the communion has not dissolved at all. In fact, it had developed a red stain which grew day by day. The communion was then sent for various scientific research. On 28 Jan 2000, it was found that the sample was a fragment of human body with human DNA and human blood and genetic code. After a lot of investigation, the sample was sent to a well-known cardiac pathology professor, Frederick of Columbia, New York. It was not informed to him that it was the Holy Communion. After studying, he said that it was a heart muscle, precisely the left ventricle, and the patient had suffered a lot of pain. And after 5.5 years of study, on March 26, 2006, it was concluded that it was a heart tissue, and on March 17, 2006, the result was brought to Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio, now Pope Francis.
In the history of Christianity, there are many Eucharistic miracles that have taken place and are still unbelievable and surprising to the humankind. One of these Eucharistic miracles took place in the year 2001 on the 5th day of May at the Parish Church of Chirtakulam in India. So this is what happened. On 20th April 2001, during a novena at the Parish Church of St. Mary in Chirtakulam, this Eucharistic miracle had occurred. During the morning adoration, 3 dots had appeared on the Eucharist, and Father Johnson Karur told the faithful to remain in prayer. He placed the Eucharist in the tabernacle, and 8 days later, that is Saturday, on May 5, 2001, Father opened the tabernacle and saw a face outlined in yellow on the Eucharist. Realizing the miracle, the faithful started adoration, and as the adoration went on, the image on the Eucharist became clearer and clearer. The clarification of the miracle was given by Archbishop Cyril Mar Basilius. The Eucharist is being kept in St. Mary's Church to this day.
This miracle occurred at the parish of St. Martin of Tours, Tixtla, Mexico on 21st October 2006. Father Leopoldo was distributing Holy Communion assisted by a religious sister. When she went to pick the Holy Communion to give it to a lady parishioner, it began to show a reddish substance on it. The scientific research conducted between October 2009 and October 2012 came to the following conclusion, presented on May 25th, that it corresponds to human blood type AB, similar to the ones found in the host of Lanciano. October 12, 2013, Most Reverend Alejo, Bishop of the Diocese of Chilpancingo, Chilapa, announced through a letter the recognition of the Eucharistic miracle. The letter said, "This manifestation brings to us a marvelous sign of the love of God, which confirms the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. In my role as a bishop of the diocese, I recognize the supernatural character of the series of events related to the bleeding of the Holy Communion in Tixtla. I declare the case as a divine sign."
Poland 2008. The Parish Church of St. Anthony of Secondo, 12th October 2008. During a Mass, as a priest was distributing communion, a Eucharist fell from his hand. He picked up the communion and placed it in a small container of water. Sister Julia, the parish sacristan, preserved the container in the sacristy. On October 19, Mission Sunday, Sister Julia opened the container and witnessed the miracle. In the middle of a communion, a curved bright red stain, like a blood stain, a living particle of body. As per the order of Archbishop Edward, on October 29, the container with the communion was transferred to the Divine Mercy Chapel and placed in the tabernacle. By January 2009, the altered fragment of the communion had dried out naturally and remained like a blood stain or daub. The studies have concluded that the structure of the fragment of the communion is identical to a myocardial tissue of a living person who is nearing death. The structure of the heart muscle fiber is deeply twisted with that of a bread in a way impossible to achieve with human means.
Let us pray. O Christ, let each one of us glorify goodness and mercy till the last moment of our life, with every drops of our blood and every beat of our heart. Amen.